Flannery O'Connor loves to start her stories with a joke and end with a jolt. Look for this as you read her stories. Good Country People begins in a kitchen. There are 3 women in this kitchen, and there are cliches. We know these are important because one of them is the title of the story. These simple expressions are a kind of shorthand to keep complexity at bay. O'Connor is already hinting at one of her main concerns in this story: the danger of allowing labels to replace discernment. And this is but one of her concerns. Like her other stories, this one's kind of funny. But it's not a joke. Beneath the humor, O'Connor is exposing 2 modern dangers: shallow faith and shallow skepticism. One hides behind niceness and the other behind intellect, but both are ways of avoiding the truth. And in this story, both become invitations for someone who knows exactly how to exploit them. So let's begin. This is Good Country People by Flannery O'Connor. Besides the neutral expression that she wore when she was alone, Mrs. Freeman had 2 others, forward and reverse, that she used for all her human dealings. Her forward expression was steady and driving, like the advance of a heavy truck. Her eyes never swerved to left or right, but turned as the story turned, as if they followed a yellow line down the center of it. She seldom used the other expression because it was not often necessary for her to retract a statement. But when she did, her face came to a complete stop. There was an almost imperceptible movement of her black eyes, during which they seemed to be receding. And then the observer could see that Mrs. Freeman, though she might stand there as real as several grain stacks thrown on top of each other, was no longer there in spirit. As for getting anything across to her when this was the case, Mrs. Hopewell had given it up. She might talk her head off. Mrs. Freeman could never be brought to admit herself wrong on any point. She would stand there, and if she could be brought to say anything, it was something like, "Well, I wouldn't have said it was, and I wouldn't have said it wasn't." Or letting her gaze range over the top kitchen shelf, where there was an assortment of dusty bottles, she might remark, "I see you ain't ate many of them figs you put up last summer." They carried on their most important business in the kitchen at breakfast. Every morning Mrs. Hopewell got up at 7 o'clock and lit her gas heater and Joy's. Joy was her daughter, a large blonde girl who had an artificial leg. Mrs. Hopewell thought of her as a child, though she was 32 years old and highly educated. Joy would get up while her mother was eating and lumber into the bathroom and slam the door, and before long Mrs. Freeman would arrive at the back door. Joy would hear her mother call, "Come on in," and then they would talk for a while in low voices that were indistinguishable in the bathroom. By the time Joy came in, they had usually finished the weather report and were on to one or the other of Mrs. Freeman's daughters, Glenise or Caramay. Joy called them Glycerin and Caramel. Glenise, a redhead, was 18 and had many admirers. Caramay, a blonde, was only 15, but already married and pregnant. She could not keep anything on her stomach. Every morning Mrs. Freeman told Mrs. Hopewell how many times she had vomited since the last report. So here we get the cast of characters with their symbolic names. Mrs. Hopewell is a landowner, and she has a daughter named Joy, who's 32 and educated. Mr. Freeman does all the farming work. Mrs. Freeman does everything else. We see that Mrs. Hopewell is pretty satisfied with herself, and it seems that the same could be said of Mrs. Freeman. They are both good country people, and they are very happy that this is so. But when you think about it, that phrase doesn't actually mean anything. It's an abstraction. O'Connor is giving us a picture of those whose identity is built on soft feelings and slogans. To them it feels like virtue, but it does nothing to train the soul to recognize truth. Mrs. Hopewell has a lot of these slogans. Nothing is perfect. That is life. Well, other people have their opinions too. These are not just cliches. They stop reflection and they feed her self-satisfaction. Notice that all these utterances are at the table, the symbolic place of communion. But it's not actually the communion of conversation, but more of a performance. O'Connor is critical of this undiscerning niceness that Mrs. Hopewell sees as a Christian virtue. And the thing is, evil doesn't easily get into a thoughtful, discerning world, but it doesn't have a very hard time at all getting into an unthinking one. O'Connor's point is not that Christians are gullible, but that unexamined faith leaves the door wide open for whatever flatters it. Mrs. Hopewell liked to tell people that Glenise and Caramay were 2 of the finest girls she knew, and that Mrs. Freeman was a lady. and that she was never ashamed to take her anywhere or introduce her to anybody they might meet. Then she would tell how she happened to hire the Freemans in the first place, and how they were a godsend to her, and how she had had them 4 years. The reason for her keeping them so long was that they were not trash. They were good country people. She had telephoned the man whose name they had given as a reference, and he had told her that Mr. Freeman was a good farmer, but that his wife was the nosiest woman ever to walk the earth. "She's got to keep into everything," the man had said. "If she don't get there before the dust settles, you can bet she's dead, that's all. She'll want to know all your business. I can stand him real good," he had said. "But me nor my wife neither could have stood that woman one more minute on this place." That had put Mrs. Hopewell off for a few days. She had hired them in the end because there were no other applicants, but she had made up her mind beforehand how she would handle the woman. Since she was the type who had to be into everything, then Mrs. Hopewell had decided she would not only let her be into everything, she would see to it that she was into everything. She would give her the responsibility of everything. She would put her in charge. Mrs. Hopewell had no bad qualities of her own, but she was able to use other people's in such a constructive way that she never felt the lack. She had hired the Freemans and she had kept them 4 years. "Nothing is perfect." This was one of Mrs. Hopewell's favorite sayings. Another was, "That is life." And still another, the most important, was, "Well, other people have their opinions too." She would make these statements, usually at the table, in a tone of gentle insistence as if no one held them but her. And the large hulking Joy, whose constant outrage had obliterated every expression from her face, would stare just a little to the side of her eyes icy blue, with a look of someone who had achieved blindness by an act of will and means to keep it. Mrs. Hopewell liked to tell people? This is such an O'Connor kind of line. This is not action, it's reported speech. It tells us that Mrs. Hopewell likes to tell people things, and she likes to tell them the same things repeatedly. It's like she maintains her identity and her place in the world by saying certain things over and over. She likes telling the story about how the Freemans came to work for her, but actually she's repeating it to show the kind of lady that she is. She's a long way from discerning the kind of person she is. There is no reflection here. She's affirming it only with the repetition of the story. There's that wonderful line where she says of the Freemans, "They were not trash, they were good country people." It's a declaration. It's enough for her. And it's completely unexamined. Mrs. Hopewell is using language as a substitute for moral perception. When words stand in for wisdom, people mistake repetition for righteousness. Or morality isn't morality, because it's not about good and evil. In this particular case, it's only about respectability. The kind of self-made goodness that needs no grace because it has no truth. And there's more self-delusion. She believes she has outsmarted Mrs. Freeman by turning her flaw into a virtue, and she's quite satisfied with her own cleverness. Then comes this astonishing claim. Mrs. Hopewell had no bad qualities of her own. The narrator says this, but she's momentarily taking on the attitudes of Mrs. Hopewell. This is called free indirect discourse. O'Connor uses this device here to make the statement almost invisible, but it shows that self-satisfaction is her moral flaw. It's the same flaw that O'Connor sees in forms of cultural Christianity, a confidence in one's own goodness that leaves no room for repentance. And joy. The final sentence introduces joy with a metaphor. She had the look of someone who had achieved blindness by an act of will and means to keep it. Joy sees herself as superior to her mother's sentimental attitudes, but she has her own kind of blindness, as we shall see. When Mrs. Hopewell said to Mrs. Freeman that life was like that, Mrs. Freeman would say, "I always said it so myself." Nothing had been arrived at by anyone that had not first been arrived at by her. She was quicker than Mrs. Freeman. When Mrs. Hopewell said to her after they had been on the place a while, "You know you're the wheel behind the wheel," she winked. Mrs. Freeman said, "I know it. I've always been quick. It's some that are quicker than others." "Everybody's different," Mrs. Hopewell said. "Yes, most people is," Mrs. Freeman said. "It takes all kinds to make the world. I always said it did myself." The girl was used to this kind of dialogue for breakfast and more of it for dinner. Sometimes they had it for supper too. When they had no guests, they ate in the kitchen because it was easier. Mrs. Freeman always managed to arrive at some point during the meal and watch them finish it. She would stand in the doorway if it were summer, but in the winter she would stand with one elbow on the top of the refrigerator and look down on them, or she would stand by the gas heater lifting the back of her skirt slightly. Occasionally she would stand against the wall and roll her head from side to side. At no time was she in any hurry to leave. All this was very trying on Mrs. Hopewell, but she was a woman of great patience. She realized that nothing is perfect, and that in the Freemans she had good country people, and that if in this day and age you could get good country people, you had better hang on to them. We're still not into any plot, just conversation made up of all these repeated cliches. Everybody is different. It takes all kinds to make the world. This language is not a tool for thinking, but a way of avoiding thought and moral complexity. We see Mrs. Freeman's character in this passage. She's quick. She always arrives at conclusions before anyone else. But her quickness is not insight. It's just confidence. This distinction matters because O'Connor wants to show the difference between being alert and being wise. She had plenty of experience with trash. Before the Freemans, she had averaged one tenant family a year. The wives of these farmers were not the kind that you would want to be around you for very long. Mrs. Hopewell, who had divorced her husband long ago, needed someone to walk over the fields with her. And when Joy had to be impressed for these services, her remarks were usually so ugly and her face so glum that Mrs. Hopewell would say, "If you can't come pleasantly, I don't want you at all." To which the girl, standing square and rigid-shouldered, with her neck thrust slightly forward, would reply, "If you want me, I'm here, like I am." Mrs. Hopewell excused this attitude because of the leg, which had been shot off in a hunting accident when Joy was 10. It was hard for Mrs. Hopewell to realize that her child was 32 now, and that for more than 20 years she had had only one leg. She thought of her still as a child because it tore her heart to think instead of the poor stout girl in her early 30s who had never danced a step or had any normal good times. Her name was really Joy, but as soon as she was 21 and away from home, she had it legally changed. Mrs. Hopewell was certain that she had thought and thought until she had hit upon the ugliest name in any language. Then she had gone and had the beautiful name Joy changed without telling her mother until after she had done it. Her legal name was Hulga. When Mrs. Hopewell thought the name, Hulga, she thought of the broad blank hull of a battleship. She would not use it. She would continue to call her Joy, to which the girl responded, but in a purely mechanical way. Hulga had learned to tolerate Mrs. Freeman, who saved her from talking walks with her mother. Even Glenise and Caramay were useful when they occupied attention that might have otherwise been directed at her. At first she had thought that she could not stand Mrs. Freeman, or she had found that it was not possible to be rude to her. Mrs. Freeman would take on strange resentments, and for days together she would be sullen, but the source of her displeasure was always obscure. A direct attack, a positive leer, blatant ugliness to her face, these never touched her. And without warning one day, she began to call her Hulga. This section has shifted to focus on Mrs. Hopewell's relationship with her daughter, and by it we can see better how these two think. The first line is about Mrs. Hopewell's self-satisfaction again, that she has plenty of experience with trash. O'Connor has been showing us that Mrs. Hopewell thinks experience is the same thing as wisdom. But here we see that her experience hasn't led to anything more than clearer categories to put other people in. She wants to get Joy crammed into the proper categories. But that doesn't go so well. For instance, she wants Joy to go on nice walks with her in the fields. But Joy does this wrong because she's too grumpy. Mrs. Hopewell wants a performance, and Joy refuses to perform. O'Connor is quietly exposing a belief system, a twisted Christianity that values pleasant behavior more than an honest confrontation with reality. Mrs. Hopewell puts all of Hulga's failings down to the missing leg. She's sympathetic, but her sympathy becomes a way of not seeing her daughter, a sentimental kindness that replaces genuine understanding. The name change is huge. Joy's decision to rename herself Hulga is not just rebellion, it's attack on everything that the name Joy represents. Hulga is an ugly name, and the ugliness is the point. Hulga rejects the pleasant associations and the comforting illusions that Mrs. Hopewell holds dear. But in doing so, she builds her own illusion, that rejecting sentimentality automatically makes her wise. She did not call her that in front of Mrs. Hopewell, who would have been incensed. But when she and the girl happened to be out of the house together, she would say something and add the name Hulga to the end of it. And the big spectacled Joy Hulga would scowl and redden as if her privacy had been intruded upon. She considered the name her personal affair. She had arrived at it first purely on the basis of its ugly sound, and then the full genius of its fitness had struck her. She had a vision of the name working like the ugly, sweating Vulcan, who stayed in the furnace and to whom, presumably, the goddess had come when called. She saw it as the name of her highest creative act. One of her major triumphs was that her mother had not been able to turn her dust into joy. But the greatest one was that she had been able to turn herself into Hulga. However, Mrs. Freeman's relish for using the name only irritated her. It was as if Mrs. Freeman's beady pointed eyes had penetrated far enough behind her face to reach some secret fact. Something about her seemed to fascinate Mrs. Freeman, and then one day Hulga realized that it was the artificial leg. Mrs. Freeman had special fondness for the details of secret infections, hidden deformities, assaults on children. Of diseases, she preferred the lingering or incurable. Hulga had heard Mrs. Hopewell give her the details of the hunting accident, how the leg had been literally blasted off, how she had never lost consciousness. Mrs. Freeman would listen to it any time, as if it had happened an hour ago. In this section, O'Connor shows that Hulga isn't just a name. It's the one thing that Joy thinks she fully controls. It's like her own private possession. And this is why it bugs her so much when Mrs. Freeman uses it casually. Some sort of intimacy line has been crossed. This reaction is significant. It shows how fragile Hulga's self-made identity is. And O'Connor's point is that self-creation, creating an identity without any grounding outside the self, well, that identity is always brittle. The reference to the image of the Roman god Vulcan reinforces the idea that Hulga sees this renaming as a rejection of her mother's sentimentality. Vulcan is the blacksmith of the gods. With the name change, Hulga forges the name herself as if in a furnace. It was her highest creative act. And this is a little ironic, because Hulga thinks she's above sentiment, but she loves this symbol of control. But Mrs. Freeman doesn't use the name this way. It's like she uses it for fun. And that's part of the humiliation that O'Connor is setting up. Hulga wants total authority over her inner life, and she can't stand it when Mrs. Freeman uses it as a plaything. Eventually, Hulga sees that Mrs. Freeman actually is really fascinated by the artificial leg. She's not curious in a caring way. She derives some weird pleasure from it. This is part of the tension. Mrs. Hopewell turns the leg into pity. Mrs. Freeman turns it into entertainment. Different responses, same result. Hulga is reduced to something less than herself. And this is inevitable when your identity has no external grounding. I know that to say that kind of thing in our culture is like unto heresy, but it's not me, it's O'Connor. Anyway, Hulga's identity is vulnerable. She thinks she's protected by her intelligence and strength of will. But the story is pointing us toward the thing that she can't fully control, the body. This is where O'Connor's Christian vision sharpens. The body is the one realm where abstract systems fail, and where illusions get exposed. When Hulga stumped into the kitchen in the morning, she could walk without making the awful noise, but she made it, Mrs. Hopewell was certain, because it was ugly sounding. She glanced at them and did not speak. Mrs. Hopewell would be in her red kimono, with her hair tied around her head in rags. She would be sitting at the table finishing her breakfast, and Mrs. Freeman would be hanging by her elbow, outward from the refrigerator, looking down at the table. Hulga always put her eggs on the stove, and then stood over them with her arms folded. And Mrs. Hopewell would look at her, a kind of indirect gaze divided between her and Mrs. Freeman, and would think that if she would only keep herself up a little, she wouldn't be so bad looking. There was nothing wrong with her face that a pleasant expression wouldn't help. Mrs. Hopewell said that people who looked on the bright side of things would be beautiful even if they were not. Whenever she looked at Joy this way, she could not help but feel that it would have been better if the child had not taken the PhD. It had certainly not brought her out any, and now that she had it, there was no more excuse for her to go to school again. Mrs. Hopewell thought it was nice for girls to go to school, to have a good time, but Joy had gone through. Anyway, she would not have been strong enough to go again. The doctors had told Mrs. Hopewell that with the best of care, Joy might see 45. She had a weak heart. Joy had made it plain that if it had not been for this condition, she would have been far from these red hills and good country people. She would be in a university lecturing people who knew what she was talking about. And Mrs. Hopewell could very well picture her there, looking like a scarecrow and lecturing to more of the same. Here she went about all day in a 6-year-old skirt and a yellow sweatshirt with a faded cowboy on a horse embossed on it. She thought this funny. Mrs. Hopewell thought it idiotic, and showed simply that she was still a child. She was brilliant, but she didn't have a grain of sense. It seemed to Mrs. Hopewell that every year she grew less like other people and more like herself. Bloated, rude, and squint-eyed. And she said such strange things. To her mother she had said, without warning, without excuse, standing up in the middle of a meal with her face purple and her mouth half full, "Woman, do you ever look inside? Do you ever look inside and see what you are not?" God! She had cried, sinking down again and staring at her plate. Malebranche was right. We are not our own light. We are not our own light. Mrs. Hopewell had no idea to this day what brought that on. She had only made the remark, hoping Joy would take it in, that a smile never hurt anyone. The girl had taken the PhD in philosophy, and this left Mrs. Hopewell at a complete loss. You could say, my daughter is a nurse, or my daughter is a school teacher, or even my daughter is a chemical engineer. But you could not say, my daughter is a philosopher. That was something that had ended with the Greeks and Romans. All day Joy sat on her neck in a deep chair, reading. Sometimes she went for walks, but she didn't like dogs or cats or birds or flowers or nature or nice young men. She looked at nice young men as if she could smell their stupidity. One day Mrs. Hopewell had picked up one of the books that the girl had just put down and opened it at random. She read, "Science, on the other hand, has to assert its soberness and seriousness afresh, and declare that it is concerned solely with what is. Nothing, how can it be for science anything but a horror and a phantasm? If science is right, then one thing stands firm. Science wishes to know nothing of nothing. Such is after all the strictly scientific approach to nothing. We know it by wishing to know nothing of nothing." These words had been underlined with a blue pencil, and they worked on Mrs. Hopewell like some evil incantation in gibberish. She shut the book quickly and went out of the room as if she were having a chill. Hulga and her mother do not see the world in the same way, and they do not understand each other. The way Hulga enters the kitchen in the morning is more evidence that she refuses to make herself more pleasant for others. Mrs. Hopewell believes that if Hulga would only keep herself up, smile and look on the bright side, then she would be fine. Again, here's that sentimental optimism that refuses truth and becomes a kind of blindness. The division comes into sharpest focus with Hulga's outburst about looking inside oneself. When Hulga shouts, "Do you ever look inside and see what you are not?" she's lashing out at her mother's sentimental optimism. She's accusing Mrs. Hopewell of refusing to face the truth about herself, of living inside a comforting illusion. The key here is that Hulga thinks that she's the one who sees reality clearly, and she's trying to shock her mother into the same bleak worldview. But then she quotes Malebranche, "We are not our own light." But here's the irony. Malebranche was a Christian philosopher who argued that human beings do not illuminate truth by themselves. We receive light from God. Hulga is using his words to make the opposite point. She thinks she's saying we don't have any inner light at all. We're empty, we are nothing. She's misusing a Christian insight to support her nihilism. This tirade shows us three things about Hulga. Her atheism is second-hand. She doesn't really understand it. She's performing philosophical depth. And she's inadvertently subverting her own beliefs. "We are not our own light" is not a declaration of despair, but a declaration of dependence on God. So the philosophies of both mother and daughter fail because neither is rooted in humility. One refuses depth and the other refuses dependence. Hulga's underlined passage about science and nothing is O'Connor's way of showing that Hulga has turned nihilism into a kind of intellectual trophy. She treats nothing as the ultimate truth that only the educated can handle. So in both of these women we have a gap between seeing and understanding, and both are self-satisfied. O'Connor isn't contrasting faith and atheism as many readers suppose. She's contrasting two different ways of refusing grace. This morning when the girl came in, Mrs. Freeman was on Caramay. "She thrown up 4 times after supper," she said, "and was up twice in the night after 3 o'clock. Yesterday she didn't do nothing but ramble in the bureau drawer. All she did, stand up there and see what she could run up on." "She's got to eat," Mrs. Hopewell muttered, sipping her coffee while she watched Joy's back at the stove. She was wondering what the child had said to the Bible salesman. She could not imagine what kind of a conversation she could possibly have had with him. He was a tall, gaunt, hatless youth who had called yesterday to sell them a Bible. He had appeared at the door, carrying a large black suitcase that weighed him so heavily on one side that he had to brace himself against the door facing. He seemed on the point of collapse, but he said in a cheerful voice, "Good morning, Mrs. Cedars," and set the suitcase down on the mat. He was not a bad-looking young man, though he had on a bright blue suit and yellow socks that were not pulled up far enough. He had prominent face bones and a streak of sticky brown hair falling across his forehead. "I'm Mrs. Hopewell," she said. "Oh," he said, pretending to look puzzled, but with his eyes sparkling. "I saw it said the Cedars on the mailbox, so I thought you was Mrs. Cedars." And he burst out in a pleasant laugh. He picked up the satchel and under cover of a pant, he fell forward into her hall. It was rather as if the suitcase had moved first, jerking him after it. "Mrs. Hopewell," he said and grabbed her hand. "I hope you are well." And he laughed again, and then all at once his face sobered completely. He paused and gave her a straight, earnest look and said, "Lady, I've come to speak of serious things." "Well, come in," she muttered, none too pleased because her dinner was almost ready. He came into the parlor and sat on the edge of a straight chair, and put his suitcase between his feet and glanced around the room, as if he were sizing her up by it. Her silver gleamed on the two sideboards. She decided that he had never been in a room as elegant as this. "Mrs. Hopewell," he began, using her name in a way that sounded almost intimate. "I know you believe in Christian service." "Well, yes," she murmured. "I know," he said, and paused, looking very wise with his head cocked on one side, "that you're a good woman. Friends have told me." Mrs. Hopewell never liked to be taken for a fool. "What are you selling?" she asked. "Bibles," the young man said. His eyes raced around the room before he added, "I see you got no family Bible in your parlor." "I see that it is one lack you got." Mrs. Hopewell could not say, "My daughter is an atheist and won't let me keep a Bible in the parlor." She said, stiffening slightly, "I keep my Bible by my bedside." This was not the truth. It was in the attic somewhere. "Lady," he said, "the Word of God ought to be in the parlor." "Well, I think that's a matter of taste," she began. "I think—" "Lady," he said, "for a Christian, the Word of God ought to be in every room in the house besides in his heart. I know you're a Christian because I can see it in every line of your face." She stood up and said, "Well, young man, I don't want to buy a Bible, and I smell my dinner burning." He didn't get up. He began to twist his hands, and looking down at them, he said softly, "Well, lady, I'll tell you the truth. Not many people want to buy one nowadays. And besides, I know I'm real simple. I don't know how to say a thing but to say it. I'm just a country boy." He glanced up into her unfriendly face. "People like you don't like to fool with country people like me." "Why," she cried, "good country people are the salt of the earth. Besides, we all have different ways of doing. It takes all kinds to make the world go round. That's life." "You said a mouthful," he said. She sure did. Did you see that she hammered him with a string of 4 of her favorite cliches? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mrs. Freeman is talking about Caramay's sickness in her usual graphic way. But Mrs. Hopewell's mind is on the Bible salesman. She's worried about what Joy might have said to him. The Bible salesman is a familiar figure in stories from the American South. He's smooth-talking, folksy, and able to speak the local language of faith so fluently that he disarms people who pride themselves on being good country people. His arrival suggests not holiness, but the possibility of hypocrisy or deceit hiding behind pious manners. His motive is, of course, to get you to buy Bibles. In this scene, presented as a flashback, the Bible salesman takes Mrs. Hopewell in completely with all kinds of manipulation. And he ends with, "I'm just a poor boy, and people like you don't want to bother with me." This hits Mrs. Hopewell exactly where she's most vulnerable. Her love for the category of people in which she includes herself. With her torrent of aphorisms, she basically affirms the exact worldview he's using to manipulate her. O'Connor wants us to see how her cliches have become blind spots. She continues in the same vein. "Why, I think there aren't enough good country people in this world," she said, stirred. "I think that's what's wrong with it." His face brightened. "I didn't introduce myself," he said. "I'm Manley Pointer, from out in the country around Willoughby. Not even from a place, just from near a place." "You wait a minute," she said. "I have to see about my dinner." She went out to the kitchen and found Joy standing near the door, where she had been listening. "Get rid of the salt of the earth," she said, "and let's eat." Mrs. Hopewell gave her a pained look and turned the heat down under her vegetables. "I can't be rude to anybody," she murmured, and went back into the parlor. He had opened the suitcase and was sitting with a Bible on each knee. "You might as well put those up," she told him. "I don't want one." "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "You don't see any more real honest people unless you go way out in the country." "I know," she said. "Real genuine folks." Through the crack in the door she heard a groan. "I guess a lot of boys come telling you they're working their way through college," he said. "But I'm not going to tell you that. Somehow," he said, "I don't want to go to college. I want to devote my life to Christian service, see?" he said, lowering his voice. "I got this heart condition. I may not live long. When you know it's something wrong with you, and you may not live long, well then, lady," he paused with his mouth open and stared at her. He and Joy had the same condition. She knew that her eyes were filling with tears, but she collected herself quickly and murmured, "Won't you stay for dinner? We'd love to have you," and was sorry the instant she heard herself say it. "Yes, ma'am," he said in an abashed voice. "I would sure love to do that." Joy had given him one look on being introduced to him, and then throughout the meal had not glanced at him again. He had addressed several remarks to her, which she pretended not to hear. Mrs. Hopewell could not understand deliberate rudeness, although she lived with it, and she felt she had always to overflow with hospitality to make up for Joy's lack of courtesy. She urged him to talk about himself, and he did. He said he was the 7th child of 12, and that his father had been crushed under a tree when he himself was 8 years old. He had been crushed very badly, in fact almost cut in two, and was practically not recognizable. His mother had got along best she could by working hard, and she had always seen her children went to Sunday school, and that they read the Bible every evening. He was now 19 years old, and had been selling Bibles for 4 months. In that time he had sold 77 Bibles, and had a promise of 2 more sales. He wanted to become a missionary because he thought that it was the way you could do most for people. "He who loseth his life shall find it," he said simply, and he was so sincere, so genuine and earnest that Mrs. Hopewell would not for the world have smiled. He prevented his peas from sliding onto the table by blocking them with a piece of bread, which he later cleaned his plate with. She could see Joy observing sideways how he handled his knife and fork, and she saw too that every few minutes the boy would dart a keen appraising glance at the girl, as if he were trying to attract her attention. After dinner, Joy cleared the dishes off the table and disappeared, and Mrs. Hopewell was left to talk with him. He told her again about his childhood, and about his father's accident, and about the various things that had happened to him. Every 5 minutes or so she would stifle a yawn. He sat for 2 hours until she told him that he must go because she had an appointment in town. He packed his Bibles and thanked her and prepared to leave, but in the doorway he stopped and wrung her hand, and said that not on any of his trips had he met a lady as nice as her, and he asked if he could come again, and she had said that she would always be happy to see him. Manley Pointer is one of the funniest names in all of literature. Very masculine, if you noticed. Anyway, he's tightening his grip on Mrs. Hopewell by saying exactly what she wants to hear. He becomes good country people for her. This helps her, without any thought, to stick him into a category of people that she trusts. This whole scene shows how Pointer gets into the front door by flattering Mrs. Hopewell's belief system. So he becomes exactly that for her. Joy can see through his machinations, but her clarity is incomplete. She sees through her mother's illusions, but not her own. She has no idea just how different this Bible salesman is than he seems. Joy had been standing in the road, apparently looking at something in the distance when he came down the steps toward her, bent to the side with his heavy valise. He stopped where she was standing and confronted her directly. Mrs. Hopewell could not hear what he said, but she trembled to think what Joy would say to him. She could see that after a minute Joy said something, and that then the boy began to speak again, making an excited gesture with his free hand. After a minute Joy said something else, at which the boy began to speak once more. Then to her amazement, Mrs. Hopewell saw the two of them walk off together, toward the gate. Joy had walked all the way to the gate with him, and Mrs. Hopewell could not imagine what they had said to each other, and she had not yet dared to ask. Mrs. Freeman was insisting on her attention. She had moved from the refrigerator to the heater, so that Mrs. Hopewell had to turn her face in order to seem to be listening. "Glennie's gone out with Harvey Hill again last night," she said. "She's got this sty." "Hill?" Mrs. Hopewell said absently. "Is that the one who works in the garage?" "No, he's the one that goes to chiropractor school," Mrs. Freeman said. She has this sty, been had it 2 days. So she says when he brought her in the other night, he says, 'Let me get rid of that sty for you.' And she says, 'How?' And he says, 'You just lay yourself down across the seat of that car and I'll show you.' So she done it, and he popped her neck. Kept on a-popping it several times until she made him quit. This morning," Mrs. Freeman said, "she ain't got no sty. She ain't got no traces of a sty." "I never heard of that before," Mrs. Hopewell said. "He asked her to marry him before the ordinary," Mrs. Freeman went on, "and she told him she wasn't going to be married in no office." "Well, Glenise is a fine girl," Mrs. Hopewell said. "Glenise and Caramay are both fine girls. Caramay said when her and Lyman was married, Lyman said it sure felt sacred to him. She said he wouldn't take $500 for being married by a preacher." "How much would he take?" the girl asked from the stove. "He said he wouldn't take $500, Mrs. Freeman repeated. "Well, we all have work to do," Mrs. Hopewell said. "Lyman said it just felt more sacred to him," Mrs. Freeman said. "The doctor wants Caramay to eat prunes. Says instead of medicine. Says them cramps is coming from pressure. You know where I think it is?" "She'll be better in a few weeks," Mrs. Hopewell said. "In the tube," Mrs. Freeman said. "Else she wouldn't be sick as she is." Hulga had cracked her 2 eggs into a saucer and was bringing them to the table along with a cup of coffee that she had filled too full. She sat down carefully and began to eat, meaning to keep Mrs. Freeman there by questions if, for any reason, she showed any inclination to leave. She could perceive her mother's eye on her. The first roundabout question would be about the Bible salesman, and she did not wish to bring it on. "How did he pop her neck?" she asked. Mrs. Freeman went into a description of how he had popped her neck. She said he owned a 55 Mercury, but that Glenise said she would rather marry a man with only a 36 Plymouth who would be married by a preacher. The girl asked what if he had a 32 Plymouth, and Mrs. Freeman said that Glenise had said it was a 36 Plymouth. Mrs. Freeman is talking about her daughters. Have you noticed that it's always stuff that falls into the TMI category? O'Connor sets the whole scene up as a contrast. Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman's world is full of small talk about barfing, styes, and prunes, while something bigger and more dangerous is going on between Joy and Manley Pointer just outside their line of vision. O'Connor loves this contrast. Trivial talk inside, spiritual danger outside, because evil rarely announces itself. It thrives where people aren't paying attention. Mrs. Hopewell said there were not many girls with Glenise's common sense. She said that what she admired in those girls was their common sense. She said that reminded her that they had had a nice visitor yesterday, a young man selling Bibles. "Lord," she said, "he bored me to death, but he was so sincere and genuine I couldn't be rude to him. He was just good country people, you know," she said. "Just the salt of the earth." "I seen him walk up," Mrs. Freeman said, "and then later I seen him walk off." And Hulga could feel the slight shift in her voice, the slight insinuation that he had not walked off alone, had he? Her face remained expressionless, but the color rose in her neck, and she seemed to swallow it down with the next spoonful of eggs. Mrs. Freeman was looking at her as if they had a secret together. "Well, it takes all kinds of people to make the world go round," Mrs. Hopewell said. "It's very good we aren't all alike." "Some people are more alike than others," Mrs. Freeman said. Hulga got up and stumped, with about twice the noise that was necessary, into her room and locked the door. She was to meet the Bible salesman at 10 o'clock at the gate. She had thought about it half the night. She had started thinking of it as a great joke, and then she had begun to see profound implications in it. She had lain in bed imagining dialogues for them that were insane on the surface, but that reached below to the depths that no Bible salesman would be aware of. Their conversation yesterday had been of this kind. He had stopped in front of her and had simply stood there. His face was bony and sweaty and bright, with a little pointed nose in the center of it, and his look was different from what it had been at the dinner table. He was gazing at her with open curiosity, with fascination, like a child watching a new fantastic animal at the zoo, and he was breathing as if he had run a great distance to reach her. His gaze seemed somehow familiar, but she could not think where she had been regarded with it before. For almost a minute he didn't say anything. Then on what seemed an insuck of breath he whispered, "You ever ate chicken that was 2 days old?" The girl looked at him stonily. He might have just put this question up for consideration at the meeting of the Philosophical Association. "Yes," she presently replied, as if she had considered it from all angles. "It must have been mighty small," he said triumphantly, and shook all over with little nervous giggles, getting very red in the face and subsiding finally into his gaze of complete admiration. while the girl's expression remained exactly the same. "How old are you?" he asked softly. She waited some time before she answered. Then in a flat voice she said, 17. His smiles came in succession like waves breaking on the surface of a little lake. "I see you got a wooden leg," he said. "I think you're brave. I think you're real sweet." The girl stood blank and solid and silent. "Walk to the gate with me," he said. "You're a brave, sweet little thing, and I liked you the minute I seen you walk in the door." Hulga began to move forward. "What's your name?" he asked, smiling down on the top of her head. "Hulga," she said. "Hulga," he murmured. "Hulga, Hulga. I never heard anybody named Hulga before. You're shy, aren't you, Hulga?" he asked. She nodded, watching his large red hand on the handle of the giant valise. "I like girls that wear glasses," he said. "I think a lot. I'm not like these people that a serious thought don't ever enter their heads. It's because I may die." "I may die too," she said suddenly and looked up at him, his eyes very small and brown, glittering feverishly. "Listen," he said, "don't you think some people was meant to meet on account of what they all got in common and all? Like they both think serious thoughts and all?" He shifted the valise to his other hand, so that his hand nearest her was free. He caught hold of her elbow and shook it a little. "I don't work on Saturday," he said. "I like to walk in the woods and see what Mother Nature is wearing. O'er the hills and far away. Picnics and things. Couldn't we go on a picnic tomorrow? Say yes, Hulga," he said, and he gave her a dying look, as if he felt his insides about to drop out of him. He had even seemed to sway slightly toward her. During the night she imagined that she seduced him. She imagined that the two of them walked on the place until they came to the storage barn beyond the two back fields, and there, she imagined, that things came to such a pass that she very easily seduced him, and that then, of course, she had to reckon with his remorse. True genius can get an idea across even to an inferior mind. She imagined that she took his remorse in hand and changed it into a deeper understanding of life. She took all his shame away and turned it into something useful. This passage shows that Hulga, who had a sort of contemptuous curiosity about Manley Pointer, is now curious. And this shows that she's also not immune to self-deception. As she lies in bed that night, she imagines how the picnic will go. She'll seduce him and then guide him through the inevitable remorse, the kind that she imagines an innocent Christian boy will experience. And then, through her brilliant explanations, she will finally elevate his understanding of life. You see how she's the teacher, the philosopher, the transformer of souls? She will shape him into someone who is deeper and wiser. Someone like herself. And of course, this prideful fantasy completely blinds her to the danger. O'Connor is setting up a tragedy. Hulga thinks she's holding all the cards. Manley Pointer is counting on her thinking exactly that. Pointer preys on whatever a person uses to justify themselves. Niceness, intellect, even unbelief, which is why both women are vulnerable in different ways. She set off for the gate at exactly 10 o'clock, escaping without drawing Mrs. Hopewell's attention. She didn't take anything to eat, forgetting that food is usually taken on a picnic. She wore a pair of slacks and a dirty white shirt, and as an afterthought, she put some Vapex on the collar of it since she did not own any perfume. When she reached the gate, no one was there. She looked up and down the empty highway and had the furious feeling that she had been tricked, that he had only meant to make her walk to the gate after the idea of him. Then suddenly he stood up, very tall, from behind a bush on the opposite embankment. Smiling, he lifted his hat, which was new and wide-brimmed. He had not worn it yesterday, and she wondered if he had bought it for the occasion. It was toast-colored with a red and white band around it, and was slightly too large for him. He stepped from behind the bush, still carrying the black valise. He had on the same suit and the same yellow socks, sucked down in his shoes from walking. He crossed the highway and said, "I knew you'd come." The girl wondered acidly how he had known this. She pointed to the valise and asked, "Why did you bring your Bibles?" He took her elbow, smiling down on her, as if he could not stop. "You can never tell when you'll need the Word of God, Hulga," he said. She had a moment in which she doubted that this was actually happening, and then they began to climb the embankment. They went down into the pasture toward the woods. The boy walked lightly by her side, bouncing on his toes. The valise did not seem to be heavy today. He even swung it. They crossed half the pasture without saying anything, and then, Putting his hand easily on the small of her back, he asked softly, "Where does your wooden leg join on?" She turned an ugly red and glared at him, and for an instant the boy looked abashed. "I didn't mean you no harm," he said. "I only meant you're so brave and all. I guess God takes care of you." "No," she said, looking forward and walking fast. "I don't even believe in God." At this he stopped and whistled. "No," he exclaimed as if he were too astonished to say anything else. She walked on, and in a second he was bouncing at her side, fanning with his hat. "That's very unusual for a girl," he remarked, watching her out of the corner of his eye. When they reached the edge of the wood, he put his hand on her back again and drew her against him without a word and kissed her heavily. The kiss, which had more pressure than feeling behind it, produced an extra surge of adrenaline in the girl that enables one to carry a packed trunk out of a burning house. But in her, the power went at once to the brain. Even before he released her, her mind, clear and detached and ironic anyway, was regarding him from a great distance, with amusement but with pity. She had never been kissed before, and she was pleased to discover that it was an unexceptional experience, and all a matter of the mind's control. Some people might enjoy drain water if they were told it was vodka. When the boy, looking expectant but uncertain, pushed her gently away, she turned and walked on, saying nothing, as if such business for her were common enough. He came along panting at her side, trying to help her when he saw a root that she might trip over. He caught and held back the long swaying blades of thorn vine until she had passed beyond them. She led the way, and he came breathing heavily behind her. Then they came out on a sunlit hillside, sloping softly into another one a little smaller. Beyond they could see the rusted top of the old barn, where the extra hay was stored. The hill was sprinkled with small pink weeds. "Then you ain't saved?" he asked, suddenly stopping. The girl smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him at all. "In my economy," she said, "I'm saved and you are damned. But I told you I didn't believe in God." Nothing seemed to destroy the boy's look of admiration. He gazed at her now as if the fantastic animal at the zoo had put its paw through the bars and had given him a loving poke. She thought he looked as if he wanted to kiss her again, and she walked on before he had the chance. "Ain't there somewheres we can sit down sometime?" he murmured, his voice softening toward the end of the sentence. "In the barn," she said. When Manley kisses Hulga, she likes that she feels detached and objective, because it confirms the story that she has constructed about herself. That she's pure intellect, above emotion, above desire, above all the weaknesses of ordinary people. She believes her PhD and her nihilism have freed her from the vulnerability that comes with feeling anything deeply. So instead of being swept up in the kiss, she's pleased to observe it from a distance, as if she were analyzing a lab experiment. She intends to free him by destroying his religious illusions. This is Hulga's own version of playing savior, imagining that she can enlighten him without realizing that the one being shaped, or deconstructed, is actually her. You probably know that the hay barn in agricultural regions is universally understood to be a place for the young people to explore physical intimacy. You've heard that phrase, "a roll in the hay"? That's what it's about. But she's the one who suggests that they go to the barn. She thinks she's in control. But they are entering a place where the body matters more than ideas, where vulnerability is physical, not theoretical. O'Connor often brings her characters to the body because it's where abstract systems collapse and the truth becomes unavoidable. At this point, Hulga could still turn back, but she doesn't. She still thinks she's safe. They made for it rapidly as if it might slide away like a train. It was a large 2-story barn, cool and dark inside. The boy pointed up the ladder that led into the loft and said, "It's too bad we can't go up there." "Why can't we?" she asked. "Your leg," he said reverently. The girl gave him a contemptuous look, and putting both hands on the ladder, she climbed it while he stood below, apparently awestruck. She pulled herself expertly through the opening, and then looking down at him said, "Well, come up if you're coming," and he began to climb the ladder, awkwardly bringing the suitcase with him. "We won't need the Bible," she observed. "You can never tell," he said, panting. After he had got into the loft, he was a few seconds catching his breath. She had sat down on a pile of straw. A weak sheath of sunlight, filled with dust particles, slanted over her. She lay back against the bale, her face turned away, looking out the front opening of the barn where the hay was thrown from a wagon into the loft. The two pink-speckled hillsides lay back against the dark ridge of the woods. The sky was cloudless and cold blue. The boy dropped down by her side and put one arm under her and the other over her, and began methodically kissing her face, making little noises like a fish. He did not remove his hat, but it was pushed far enough back not to interfere. When her glasses got in the way, he took them off her and slipped them into his pocket. The girl at first did not return any of the kisses, but presently she began to, and after she had put several on his cheek, she reached his lips and remained there, kissing him again and again, as if she were trying to draw all the breath out of him. His breath was clear and sweet like a child's, and the kisses were sticky like a child's. He mumbled about loving her, and about knowing when he first seen her that he loved her, but the mumbling was like the sleepy fretting of a child being put to sleep by his mother. Her mind throughout this never stopped or lost itself for a second to her feelings. "You ain't said you love me none," he whispered finally, pulling back from her. "You got to say that." She looked away from him into the hollow sky and then down at the black ridge, and then down further into what appeared to be two green swelling lakes. She didn't realize that he had taken her glasses, but this landscape could not seem exceptional to her, for she seldom paid close attention to her surroundings. "You got to say it," he repeated. "You got to say you love me." She was always careful how she committed herself. "In a sense," she began, "if you use the word loosely, you might say that. But it's not a word I use. I don't have illusions. I'm one of those people who sees through to nothing." The boy frowned. "You got to say it." "I said it, and you got to say it," he said. The girl looked at him almost tenderly. "You poor baby," she murmured. "It's just as well you don't understand." And she pulled him by the neck, face down, against her. "We are all damned," she said. "But some of us have taken off our blindfolds and see that there's nothing to see. It's a kind of salvation." The boy's astonished eyes looked blankly through the ends of her hair. "Okay," he almost whined, "but do you love me or don't you?" "Yes," she said, and added, "in a sense. But I must tell you something. There mustn't be anything dishonest between us." She lifted his head and looked him in the eye. "I am 30 years old," she said. "I have a number of degrees." The boy's look was irritated but dogged. "I don't care," he said. "I don't care a thing about what all you've done. I just want to know if you love me or don't you." And he caught her to him and wildly planted her face with kisses until she said, "Yes, yes." "Okay then," he said, letting her go. "Prove it." She smiled, looking dreamily out on the shifting landscape. She had seduced him without even making up her mind to try. "How?" she asked, feeling that he should be delayed a little. He leaned over and put his lips to her ear. "Show me where your wooden leg joins on," he whispered. Hulga has no idea what's happening. O'Connor is using the loft as a symbolic trap. It's high, it's hidden, it's hard to escape from. All Hulga's fantasies from the night before come into play. She imagines herself as strong and clear-headed and experienced, someone who can lead this simple boy toward the truth. In her mind, the seduction is just the method. The real goal is to show him the foolishness of his simple Christian beliefs. And the script is going even more easily than she imagined. She eventually says that she loves him, and he says, "Prove it." And we know exactly what's supposed to come next. We know that she's supposed to show him something or let him something, but that's not what comes next. He wants to see something far more intimate, where her artificial leg attaches. But let's go back to before that. The script. She starts on deconstructing his illusions. She talks about how she's taken off her blindfold and is now seeing through to nothing. And then he takes off her glasses and puts them in his pocket. This is a small detail, but it carries a lot of weight. When he takes them off, he literally blurs her vision. It's the first step in deconstructing her illusions. When she starts talking about seeing through to nothingness, she thinks that she's unveiling the deepest truth of the universe. The brave, honest insight that she believes sets her above ordinary people. But now things are blurry. Anyway, he wants to see her artificial leg. The girl uttered a sharp little cry and her face instantly drained of color. The obscenity of the suggestion was not what shocked her. As a child, she had sometimes been subject to feelings of shame, But education had removed the last traces of that, as a good surgeon scrapes for cancer. She would no more have felt it over what he was asking than she would have believed in his Bible. But she was as sensitive about the artificial leg as a peacock about his tail. No one ever touched it but her. She took care of it as someone else would his soul, in private, and almost with her own eyes turned away. "No," she said. "I known it," he murmured, sitting up. "You're just playing me for a sucker." "Oh, no, no," she cried. "It joins on at the knee." "Only at the knee? Why do you want to see it?" The boy gave her a long, penetrating look. "Because," he said, "it's what makes you different. You ain't like anybody else." She sat staring at him. There was nothing about her face or her round, freezing blue eyes to indicate that this had moved her. But she felt as if her heart had stopped and left her mind to pump her blood. She decided that for the first time in her life she was face to face with real innocence. This boy, with an instinct that came from beyond wisdom, had touched the truth about her. When after a minute she said in a hoarse, high voice, "All right," it was like surrendering to him completely. It was like losing her own life and finding it again miraculously in his. Very gently he began to roll the slack leg up. The artificial limb, in its white sock and brown flat shoe, was bound in a heavy material like canvas and ended in an ugly jointure where it was attached to the stump. The boy's face and his voice were entirely reverent as he uncovered it and said, "Now show me how to take it off and on." She took it off for him and put it back on again, and then he took it off himself, handling it as tenderly as if it were a real one. "See," he said with a delighted child's face, "now I can do it myself." "Put it back on," she said. She was thinking that she would run away with him, and that every night he would take the leg off and every morning put it back on again. "Put it back on," she said. "Not yet," he murmured, setting it on its foot out of her reach. "Leave it off for a while. You got me instead." She gave a little cry of alarm, but he pushed her down and began to kiss her again. Without the leg, she felt entirely dependent on him. Her brain seemed to have stopped thinking altogether, and to be about some other function that it was not very good at. Different expressions raced back and forth over her face. Every now and then the boy, his eyes like two steel spikes, would glance behind him, where the leg stood. Finally she pushed him off and said, "Put it back on me now." "Wait," he said. He leaned the other way and pulled the valise toward him and opened it. It had a pale blue spotted lining and there were only 2 Bibles in it. He took one of these out and opened the cover of it. It was hollow and contained a pocket flask of whiskey, a pack of cards, and a small blue box with printing on it. He laid these out in front of her one at a time, in an evenly spaced row, like one presenting offerings at the shrine of a goddess. He put the blue box in her hand. "This product to be used only for the prevention of disease," she read, and dropped it. The boy was unscrewing the top of the flask. He stopped and pointed with a smile to the deck of cards. It was not an ordinary deck, but one with an obscene picture on the back of each card. "Take a swig," he said, offering her the bottle first. He held it in front of her, but like one mesmerized, she did not move. Her voice when she spoke had an almost pleading sound. "Aren't you?" she murmured. "Aren't you just good country people?" The boy cocked his head. He looked as if he were just beginning to understand that she might have been trying to insult him. "Yeah," he said, curling up his lips slightly, "but that ain't held me back none. I'm as good as you any day of the week." "Give me my leg," she said. He pushed it further away with his foot. "Come on now, let's begin to have us a good time," he said coaxingly. "We ain't got to know one another good yet." "Give me my leg," she screamed, and tried to lunge for it, but he pushed her down easily. "What's the matter with you all of a sudden?" he asked, frowning as he screwed the top on the flask and put it quickly back inside the Bible. "You just a while ago said you didn't believe in nothing. I thought you was some girl." Her face was almost purple. "You're a Christian," she hissed. "You're a fine Christian. You're just like them all. Say one thing and do another. You're a perfect Christian. You're—" The boy's mouth was set angrily. "I hope you don't think," he said in a lofty, indignant tone, "that I believe in that crap. I may sell Bibles, but I know which end is up. I wasn't born yesterday, and I know where I'm going." This is the climax of the story. She thought she was in control of the situation. She thought she was going to convert this simple country bumpkin into her way of seeing the world. But it turns out, he's already far in advance of her. Before, she was talking about seeing through everything into nothing, But this has always been just an idea that she uses to feel superior to everyone else. For Manley, this nothing is a way of life. All along, O'Connor has been showing us that the leg is Hulga's most protected vulnerability, physically, emotionally, and symbolically. It's the most private part of herself. She's not into sacred things, but in the context of her self-constructed identity, this is on the sacred level. So when she agrees to let him take it off, it's huge, and she's exposed. In the intimacy of this moment, she even begins to fantasize about a future with him, where he takes off and puts on her leg daily. And did you notice that with the intimacy of leg removal, her brain stopped working? It turns out he isn't just good country people. And now her plan completely collapses. You can't convert a practical nihilist to philosophical nihilism. The good country image is fake. She attempts to brand him a Christian hypocrite, but this doesn't stick, because he's the opposite. For one thing, he's not a Christian, and the other thing, he's not a hypocrite. His life is consistent with his philosophy. Hulga doesn't go all the way. Manley does. If there is no God, then there is no meaning, then there is no sacred, then there is no truth, and there's no good, and there's no evil, and there's no reason to build your philosophy on. So all that's left to do is just take what you want. This is where Hulga realizes she's dealing with someone who has already moved past her into actual cruelty. So Hulga is forced to confront the real end of her philosophy. Not clever detachment, but a world where nothing is sacred and everything is usable. "Give me my leg," she screeched. He jumped up so quickly that she barely saw him sweep the cards and the blue box into the Bible and throw the Bible into the valise. She saw him grab the leg, and then she saw it for an instant slanted forlornly across the inside of the suitcase, with a Bible at either side of its opposite ends. He slammed the lid shut and snatched up the valise and swung it down the hole, and then he stepped through himself. When all of him had passed but his head, he turned and regarded her with a look that no longer had any admiration in it. "I've gotten a lot of interesting things," he said. "One time I got a woman's glass eye this way. And you needn't think you'll catch me, because Pointer ain't my real name. I use a different name at every house I call at, and I don't stay nowhere long. And I'll tell you another thing, Hulga," he said, using the name as if he didn't think much of it. "You ain't so smart. I've been believing in nothing ever since I was born." And then the toast-colored hat disappeared down the hole, and the girl was left sitting on the straw in the dusty sunlight. When she turned her churning face toward the opening, she saw his blue figure struggling successfully over the green-speckled lake. The humiliations compound. Hulga has built her entire identity out of things that she believes she has chosen herself. Her intellectual superiority, her willpower, her artificial leg, and her name. These let her imagine that she is a self-created, self-contained being. By the end of the story, Hulga has been stripped of every part of her identity that she thought she had built herself. And this collapse is precisely what, in O'Connor's vision, makes her able to receive grace. It's a brutal form of revelation, the kind O'Connor often uses. Grace comes in not as comfort, but as the collapse of all the lies that a character lives by. Hulga is not yet redeemed, but she's empty, and now she is open, for the first time, to the possibility of grace. She's been proud of seeing through other people's illusions. And now her own illusions have been exposed through a kind of violence. What else do you call it when a guy runs off with your leg? Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman, who were in the back pasture digging up onions, saw him emerge a little later from the woods and head across the meadow toward the highway. "Why, that looks like that nice dull young man who tried to sell me a Bible yesterday," Mrs. Hopewell said, squinting. "He must have been selling to the Negroes back in there. He was so simple," she said, "but I guess the world would be better off if we were all that simple." Mrs. Freeman's gaze drove forward and just touched him before he disappeared under the hill. Then she returned her attention to the evil-smelling onion root she was lifting from the ground. "Some can't be that simple," she said. "I know I never could." The aftermath is where O'Connor lands the final irony. After everything that happens in the barn, the story snaps right back to normal. Back to the women, back to the small talk, back to nothing is perfect. That shift is the point. It shows how a comfortable society can glide past something brutal without ever seeing it. Hulga is stranded and humiliated. Who knows how long it takes her to get back home? Meanwhile, Mrs. Hopewell and Mrs. Freeman keep talking. Keep categorizing. Keep missing the truth. The story ends exactly where it began, with people who can talk but can't see. This is why Good Country People is so powerful. It's not a joke, it's an indictment. The cliches and the sentimental optimism are not harmless. They are ways of smoothing over reality so you never have to face anything uncomfortable. And it's an indictment of cynical skepticism. That doesn't make you better than those who have a simple faith. These blindnesses are exactly what people like Manley Pointer depend on. He cleverly figures out what people want to believe, and he performs it back to them. He thrives in the space created by shallow faith and shallow skepticism. These two illusions are still with us today. They both feel solid, but both leave you wide open. And this is where the Christian worldview cuts through all these characters. Mrs. Hopewell lives by pleasant illusions, goodness as niceness and virtue as optimism. Hulga lives by self-creation, intellect as identity, skepticism as superiority. Pointer lives by opportunism, identity as costume, sincerity as leverage. A biblical vision challenges all three. It teaches that the human heart isn't naturally wise, or naturally good, or naturally safe. And it insists that evil is ordinary, deceptive, and often polite, which is exactly why discernment must be rooted in something deeper than feelings or intellect. This is very relevant in a world built on branding, curated identities, and performative virtue. And if your worldview has no category for evil that smiles and plays the part, you will be exactly the kind of person that Manley Pointer looks for. O'Connor doesn't show us redemption, only the collapse of the illusions of one character. But that collapse is the only ground where grace can begin. May breath come to the dry bones. Thank you. I'll see you next time.